Tonight, we drift eastward toward the dense green shoulders of the Dangrek Mountains, where moonlight spills over ancient stone and crickets sing like they've never heard of land disputes. You're standing barefoot metaphorically unless you're really committed on a ledge overlooking the Preah Vihear Temple, a gravity-defying Khmer masterpiece perched absurdly close to the edge of what maps call the Thailand-Cambodia border. But tonight, the lines are soft. You feel the warmth of old sandstone beneath your fingers, the kind that's seen 1,000 monsoons and just as many disagreements. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe, only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world, like a family, scattered but still connected. All right, now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. So here you are, where two proud nations converge and sometimes collide not over oil fields or treasure, but temples. Specifically temples built hundreds of years before modern borders existed. Temples like Preah Vihear, where lichen curls into the stone, and prayers once whispered in Sanskrit drifted down into jungle mist. For Cambodians, it's a crown jewel of the Khmer Empire, a civilization so vast and confident it built water reservoirs you could see from space. For Thais, it's a cherished reminder of cultural overlap, spiritual resonance, and, let's be honest, a bit of national ego. These ruins aren't just bricks, they're memory, anchors in the mist of history. And because memory is fickle and pride is stubborn, the moment lines were drawn, first casually, then legally, arguments began. The temple complex was caught in the haze, located atop a cliff that favors Thailand geographically, but belongs per ancient Khmer construction and a later legal ruling to Cambodia. A delicious contradiction unless you're trying to patrol it with armed soldiers. Centuries ago, the kingdoms of Angkor and Ayutthaya had already been dancing around this region. The Khmer Empire once stretched deep into present-day Thailand, with Angkor Wat not far off. Their temples rose like time capsules across the land, testifying to a golden age when Sanskrit inscriptions and irrigation channels coexisted like monks and mango trees. And then, as all empires do, Angkor declined, pushed by invasions, climate change, and perhaps just exhaustion. The power vacuum left behind created a jigsaw of emerging Thai states and shrinking Khmer influence. Fast forward to the late 1800s and early 1900s, you've now got European colonialists making all this even messier, like guests who rearranged the furniture and then left without telling anyone where they put the keys. The French, who had acquired Cambodia under their Indochina umbrella, were particularly good at drawing lines, sometimes on maps, sometimes just in their heads. They included the Preah Vihear Temple within Cambodian territory, despite its physical access being easier from Thailand. A tiny cartographic decision, barely a pen stroke, but it would echo like a gong across the decades. You lean against a stone pillar as the wind picks up, rustling the trees below. Imagine being a villager living nearby in the early 20th century. You grow rice, you pray. You maybe light a candle at the temple during Chum Ben festival, but suddenly you're told no, this land is no longer Siamese, it's part of French Cambodia. How, why? Because a map says so isn't the most comforting answer. Historians still argue whether the French made this call based on temple heritage, political calculation, or just sloppy mapping. Regardless, it stuck. And even after Thailand, then Siam, reclaimed territory briefly during World War II, the post-colonial period left the temple in Cambodia's legal hands. Thailand, of course, didn't love that. The temple felt Thai. It sat close to Thai soil, but unfortunately for them, the World Court disagreed. Before the ink dried on that 1962 ruling, you could already sense the quiet resentment beginning to ferment. But that's a tale for another section. For now, picture the soft moonlight bathing the stone relief's dancers, frozen in sandstone eyes half-lidded like they too are weary of all the arguing. Somewhere in the dark, a gecko chirps. Somewhere closer, maybe a border guard sighs. But tonight, there's peace. at least until the roosters start calling the dawn to order. Now you're floating forward still in that cradle of mountains and memory, but time has fast-forwarded. It's the early 1900s, and somewhere deep in a stuffy colonial office, think maps rolled up like pastries, compasses gleaming, and a Frenchman chewing a moustache of a problem someone is deciding where Cambodia ends and where Siam begins. They're not walking the terrain, they're not visiting the people, they're just drawing, with ink, on brittle paper. You hover over a desk in Saigon where French colonial officials pore over topographic surveys. The air is thick with humidity and colonial confidence. They've sent their cartographers up into the Dangrek range, and they've returned with sketchy outlines, elevation charts, and a blurry sense of cultural zones. They had no idea the ripple they were about to send across the century. The decision put Preah Vihear on the Cambodian side. Why? Possibly because the temple itself was Khmer in style, possibly because it made logistical sense for administration, or possibly because someone yawned during the briefing. France's mapmakers used watershed lines to mark boundaries, natural high points where water flows into different regions. It's a common method, but here's the catch. Preah Vihear Temple is north of the watershed line facing Thailand, perched so close to the cliff's edge it practically watches Thai villages blink at night. So how did it end up in Cambodia's corner of the map? Historians still argue whether it was a cartographic oversight, a bureaucratic sleight of hand, or a deliberate act to preserve Khmer heritage. Now you glide into 1907. Siam signs a treaty with France, ceding several territories, including Preah Vihear, to French-controlled Cambodia. The Siamese leadership, keen on preserving sovereignty in other areas and avoiding colonial entanglements, accepts the treaty. Some say they didn't even realize what they were giving away. Others believe they knew, but had little choice. Thailand was in the midst of its own dance of modernity, reforming institutions, centralizing power, and treading carefully around European powers who eyed the region like a buffet table. On the ground, villagers still light incense at the temple. Farmers still tend to fields with a foot in each country. The border means little to them. But to diplomats, it's everything. And that map, the one with the temple tucked into Cambodian territory, will eventually become Exhibit A in a courtroom thousands of miles away. The French, meanwhile, invest in preservation. Sort of. They document Khmer ruins like Preah Vihear and Angkor Wat with the enthusiasm of amateur archaeologists, but the control of colonial gatekeepers. Some stones are catalogued, others quietly shipped off to museums in Paris. This was the golden age of European ruin obsession after all, Indiana Jones with more paperwork and less whip-cracking. One fringe tidbit that often gets overlooked local lore has it that the temple's cliffside location wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. Some say it served as a spiritual lookout, a place to commune with the divine sky and perhaps monitor approaching invaders from the plains below. Others argue it was simply the flattest available rock at the time. You smile, that's history half vision, half coincidence. Back in Bangkok, Siamese elites start to push for modern education, printing textbooks that mention lost territories with a note of melancholy. Cambodia, under French rule, rarely emphasizes border clarity in its curricula. The temple becomes a symbol for both countries, but quietly and separately, like two people who shared a childhood home and later argue over who inherited the living room couch. Decades pass, Thailand begins to regain territory and independence. Cambodia, too, edges toward autonomy from France. And that old map from 1907, it's gathering dust but gaining value. You can almost hear it whispering from the archive shelf, someone's going to need me someday. And they will. Because maps in this part of the world aren't just for navigation, they're time bombs. Each line drawn is a potential spark. And once lit, no one can say how far the flame will crawl. But tonight, that map lies quiet, somewhere in a museum drawer or a court record. And you, dear listener, are floating above it all, watching the faint lines pulse with unspoken tension, knowing that sooner than the villagers or the diplomats expect, that faint ink stroke will find its way to the International Court of Justice, and an old temple on a cliff will again become the stage for history's slow-moving theatre. You're drifting through the trees now, through time's green curtain, and behind it you glimpse the old world and empire in full bloom. The Khmer Empire, mighty and ambitious, unfurls before you like a silk banner across the land. From the 9th to the 15th century, it stretched far and wide, from the Mekong to the Chao Phraya Basin, from the jungles of Cambodia, deep into what is now Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. It was a time when temples weren't just built, they were summoned into being. Massive, sacred sprawling, etched with stories in Sanskrit and Khmer, crawling with apsaras and lions frozen in sandstone, and you float through it all above moats and canals, above long processions of elephants and kings. The Khmer knew how to make an entrance. You sensed the pulse of Angkor Thom's royal square, the logic of Angkor Wat's celestial layout, and the quiet dignity of Preah Vihear, perched alone on its clifftop like a scholar who prefers solitude to ceremony. The empire's network of temples wasn't random. Each one was placed with the alignment of the stars, the whisper of the land, and the pulse of the state in mind. But this grandeur, this glorious sprawl, is also why things get messy later. Because when the Khmer Empire fell gradually, awkwardly, and not all at once, it left behind more than ruins. It left behind a jigsaw of identity. Places once unquestionably Khmer were now occupied by Thai-speaking peoples. Kingdoms like Sukhothai and later Ayutthaya rose up, absorbing what had once been Khmer soil culture and even architectural vocabulary. You look at some Thai temples and squint, you see the echoes, the borrowed grandeur, the continuity layered beneath difference. Historians still debate whether these cultural overlaps were peaceful inheritances or political theft. Did the Thai kingdoms gracefully adopt Khmer aesthetics, or did they plant flags atop fading empires? Either way, the legacy of Khmer stonework in Thailand and Thai influence in former Khmer lands created an identity soup so rich that no modern border could fully untangle it. Take Bante Chma, for example, another temple not far from the modern boundary. It's Khmer, unmistakably so, but its weathered faces look out toward lands that now fly Thai flags. And the people, many, have Khmer surnames, speak Thai dialects, and offer incense at both Buddhist and animist shrines. The land remembers all its rulers, but it doesn't choose sides. And that's the rub. When Cambodia points to Preah Vihear or other temples as ours, it's not just nationalism, it's a claim rooted in empire, in the grandeur of Angkor. When Thailand answers, it's often with its own tapestry of historical control, cultural familiarity, and let's be real, proximity. Preah Vihear can only be accessed easily from the Thai side. It's as if Cambodia built a house and forgot to add a front door, and Thailand accidentally built a driveway to it. You smile again, it's absurd, but it's also deadly serious. These sites are ancient, sacred, and beautiful, but they're also chess pieces in a modern game where memory and myth merge, and where every stone is weighted with centuries of emotion. There's also a quirky little detail here. Many Thai school children are taught about lost territories, with maps that quietly include some of these ancient Khmer areas as places once belonging to Siam. In Cambodian schools, students hear about the same places as symbols of French betrayal or Thai encroachment. It's like two families arguing over which side of the wedding cake they paid for, long after the cake has been eaten. Still, the temples remain. Some crumble, some get propped up with scaffolding and UNESCO grants. Others, like Preah Vihear, get caught in the legal tug-of-war, bearing the scars not of age, but of bullets and flagpoles planted too close to one another. You float past the scarred walls, noting where shrapnel left marks, not from centuries ago, but from the 2000s. And here's something you may not have heard. According to some scholars, the cliff that Preah Vihear sits on was once known in Khmer legend as a place where gods could hear human wishes more clearly, where prayers carried straight to heaven without interference. Maybe that's why it was built there, or maybe it was just a good view. Scholars still debate that too. But wouldn't it be nice if it were true? Now the stars come out again. You look down, and below you lie not just stones and moss, but questions that never truly die. Who gets to inherit empire? Where does memory end and politics begin? and what happens when the ruins refuse to stay silent. You exhale. The jungle breathes with you. Somewhere, an old monk ties a saffron ribbon around a tree trunk, whispering blessings for peace that drift upward like incense, straight toward the cliff and into the realm of the dreaming gods. Now you find yourself standing quietly beside a long wooden table in The Hague. It's 1962 and the room hums, not with chanting monks or jungle insects, but with legalese translation headsets and the slow clack of typewriter keys. The International Court of Justice is about to deliver its verdict in a case that's been brewing for over half a century, a border dispute with a temple at its heartstone on one side, nationalism on the other. Preah Vihear has made it all the way to court, not because of oil, not because of gold, because of memory, and maybe a bit of pride. Thailand and Cambodia, both independent, now have taken their case to the highest legal stage. The key argument, that dusty map from 1907, the one French cartographers prepared and Siam tacitly accepted without objection for decades. Cambodia, freshly out from under France's protective but patronizing wing, argues that Thailand acknowledged the border long ago and can't suddenly change its mind. Thailand counters that the temple is north of the watershed, meaning it should be theirs. The judges deliberate. A panel of European voices, not necessarily familiar with the smell of lemongrass or the clang of Buddhist bells, but confident in law, considers the historical records, treaties, behaviors of both parties, and yes, that fateful map. And then the verdict comes down like soft thunder. The court rules that Preah Vihear belongs to Cambodia. Thailand, they say, had accepted the map and failed to object in time. Case closed. But is it? You now float gently through the reaction on both sides. In Cambodia, there are celebrations, cautious but proud. Flags are waved, poems are written. Sihanouk, the enigmatic prince-turned-politician, declares it a victory not just of land, but of identity. For a country often overshadowed by its neighbors, this is a moment of visibility, of validation. In Thailand, it stings. The decision isn't just unpopular, it's radioactive. Political leaders mutter about fairness. Military officers scowl at maps. The public feels a sharp pinch of humiliation. After all, from their side, the temple is right there, reachable only from Thai soil. It's like being told your own driveway leads to someone else's house. Historians still argue whether Thailand's diplomatic team mishandled the case or whether the ruling reflected post-colonial sensitivities, a kind of symbolic compensation for Cambodia's long subjugation. Some Thai scholars whisper that their government was too slow to object to the map's original placement. Others say the court leaned too hard on technicalities. Either way, the ruling stuck, legally that is. Emotionally, not so much. And here's where things start to simmer. Thailand complies with the ruling eventually, but resentment brews under the surface. The temple becomes a quiet symbol of loss, and with loss comes myth-making. One Thai tabloid even runs a story claiming the temple's spirits prefer Thai monks. Completely unverified, deeply amusing, still it spreads. And the line between history and national storytelling gets blurrier with every passing year. By the 1980s and 1990s, Cambodia is knee-deep in civil conflict and Preah Vihear is largely inaccessible. Landmines are scattered nearby. The jungle starts to reclaim the path. Thai tourists occasionally peer at the temple from their side of the cliff, while Cambodian soldiers dig trenches in the shade of ancient lintels. And then, like a long-forgotten fire suddenly finding dry wood, tensions reignite in the early 2000s. Here's a quirky little episode. In 2001, Thailand and Cambodia almost come to blows over a stone staircase. Not the whole temple, just one staircase. It was being restored with international help, and one government's plaque ended up placed a few meters too far in. Suddenly this stone step became a sovereign symbol. You can't make this up. By now the ICJ ruling is decades old, but the emotions are fresh. Thailand insists the ruling only covered the temple, not the land around it. Cambodia insists the ruling covered the surrounding promontory. And as usual, the people who live nearby, mostly farmers and monks, are the ones caught in the middle. You imagine one such farmer now rolling his eyes as soldiers from both sides glare at each other over a weathered stone fence. He just wants to harvest his cassava in peace. And here's a fringe tidbit that's both funny and tragic. During one of the border skirmishes in 2011, soldiers from both sides exchanged fire. And then during a lull, reportedly traded food. Sticky rice and dried fish passed between enemies who knew how to aim rifles but also how to survive boredom. The absurdity of it all, armed men eating together after exchanging bullets, perfectly encapsulates the surreal tone of this long, low-burning dispute. You now float over the temple again, where the sun is setting, casting long shadows over the steps. The lintels seem to sigh. Yes, the court ruling changed history on paper, but on the ground the story is still being written. One argument, one plaque, one flagpole at a time. And beneath it all, the stone temple endures, unmoved, uninterested. It watches us argue over it like a grandmother tired of her squabbling grandchildren, silently urging us to remember that it was never built to divide. It was built to worship, to elevate, to reach the sky. You're no longer floating above courtrooms or temples. Now you find yourself crouched behind a low bush ears, perked heart, thudding softly, not from fear, but disbelief. It's the late 2000s and actual gunfire is crackling through the ancient quiet of the Preah Vihear Plateau. On both sides of the disputed border, soldiers are trading not accusations, but bullets exchanged over temples carved by hands, long turned to dust. You blink. How did this happen? Just a few years earlier, Cambodia had successfully pushed for Preah Vihear's inscription as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. On paper, it was a cultural victory. In reality, it was like tossing a match into dry leaves. Thailand objected not necessarily to the temple being recognized, but to what it implied that the surrounding land too belonged to Cambodia. Suddenly flags were planted, fences erected, and nationalism dialed up to 11. It didn't help that both countries had domestic politics teetering on instability. What better distraction than a noble fight over heritage? You shift your gaze down the dusty path leading to the temple. In July 2008, the Thai and Cambodian militaries began reinforcing their positions. Soldiers arrived with rifles, machetes, and this is not a joke, hammocks, because even tense standoffs have naps. You could practically hear the jungle sigh. In October of that year, shots were fired. It was brief, chaotic, and tragically real. Lives were lost. One Cambodian soldier, according to local accounts, died just meters from the base of a stone lion that had been guarding the temple since the 11th century. Historians still argue whether these skirmishes were truly about the land or simply political theatre turned lethal. The answer might be both. Over the next few years, fighting would flare up again. In 2011, clashes escalated further with artillery exchanged and even rockets involved. Soldiers on both sides hunkered in bunkers built beside centuries-old carvings. A Thai news crew filming near the border accidentally caught a shell exploding not far from the temple's gate. And somewhere in the background, a monk swept fallen leaves off an altar like it was just another Tuesday. But here's a strange little detail you might not have heard. At one point, the Cambodian side began blasting traditional music loudly through mounted speakers pointed toward Thai positions. It was meant as a psychological tactic or perhaps a cultural flex. The Thai soldiers, rather than retaliate, reportedly turned up their own speakers and answered with pop ballads. It wasn't exactly war by iTunes, but it certainly wasn't the diplomacy ASEAN had in mind. You hover now above the village of Kantharalak on the Thai side and Choam Ksant on the Cambodian side. These are not war zones, they're farming communities. Rice paddies, dusty roads, noodle stalls. But suddenly their skies were streaked with tracer fire, their nights shattered by the rattle of small arms. Locals fled, schools closed, tourists vanished, and all for a few square kilometers of forested hilltop no one had really cared about until it was labeled disputed. At the heart of all this absurdity sits Preah Vihear, utterly unamused, still tall, still dignified, still filled with sandstone stories that have nothing to do with rockets or borders. A temple that once heard priests chant Vedic verses, now echoes with the cautious steps of UN observers, camera crews and soldiers with itchy fingers. The situation eventually prompted both sides to return once more to The Hague. In 2013, the ICJ issued a clarification the entire promontory around the temple belonged to Cambodia, including the nearby vicinity that Thailand had claimed. The ruling aimed to end the fighting, and to a large extent it did. But the memories linger. You float now past a tree near the temple, where Thai and Cambodian soldiers reportedly carved their names side by side during a ceasefire lull. A kind of unspoken truce, a reminder that beneath the politics, beneath the flags and rifle barrels, there were people. Young men with families, villagers just trying to farm, monks trying to meditate without mortar fire in the background. One elderly villager on the Thai side, interviewed in 2012, summed it up with sleepy wisdom. The temple doesn't care who owns it, it just wants peace. And maybe that's the quiet truth. Preah Vihear wasn't built for conflict, it was built for the heavens. Everything else, maps, rulings, flags, is just temporary clutter on the long path of time. So now, with the night curling gently around the stone stairways once more, you listen for the silence after conflict. The jungle slowly reclaims the loudness, frogs return, so do the pilgrims. A new monk walks the path barefoot at dawn, stopping to sprinkle water at the base of a scarred column. He bows, and for a moment the air forgets the sounds of gunfire and remembers only chanting. Now your steps take you down from the cliffs and into the lowlands through a patchwork of rice paddies, wooden stilt houses and dusty border villages whose names shift slightly depending on which map you're using. This is the human side of the boundary, where people live not as Cambodians or Thais but as farmers, merchants and monks, people with roots deeper than flags who share a language of soil, rain and harvest. And yet somehow they're the ones always caught in the middle. In the villages flanking the Preah Vihear Plateau, the line between nations is not just blurred, it's often irrelevant. Cousins live on opposite sides. Traders walk across the invisible divide without a second thought, at least when tensions are low. Chickens don't carry passports, neither do buffalo. And most days life is more about planting cycles than politics. But when disputes flare up, the quiet rhythms of these border communities get rattled by loudspeakers, patrols and curfews. Here's a strange but telling detail. In one Cambodian village near the disputed zone, residents built a tiny shrine, not to Buddha or Vishnu, but to the spirit of the border. It's a humble structure, just a thatched roof, some incense sticks, and a sign asking for harmony. Locals say they offer prayers there whenever soldiers start gathering again, asking the spirit to keep things boring, a sacred wish in any hotspot. Meanwhile, in Thai border towns like Kantharalak, small businesses stock dual-language goods. You might see Cambodian sugar next to Thai snacks. Some shopkeepers can shift between Khmer and Thai without pausing depending on who walks in. They're fluent not just in language but in diplomacy. You learn to be when your village could be in the news tomorrow. During periods of high tension, however, these same communities are the first to suffer. Schools close, markets empty, rumors spread. Did soldiers set up a new post? Was there another shot fired near the old temple wall? Are the Thai rangers coming through, or was that just the sound of a cow knocking over a bucket again? You can't always tell, but you learn to pack quickly. Historians still argue whether these people are victims of geopolitics or stewards of peace. After all, it's often villagers, grandmothers with woven baskets, novice monks with brooms who quietly de-escalate tension. In one case, when soldiers were eyeing each other nervously over a boundary marker, a local wedding erupted nearby with drums singing and far too much rice wine. The music drowned out the nerves. Guests from both sides mingled. By the end of the night, one soldier had traded his helmet for a garland of jasmine and was dancing barefoot in the dirt. And here's another light, but telling tidbit. In the early 2010s, a small group of villagers on both sides of the border started hosting an unofficial sticky rice festival. The idea was simple: cook together, eat together, and don't talk politics. It worked. For one weekend each year, temple walls echoed not with slogans, but with laughter and the clinking of bamboo rice tubes. No media, no officials, just neighbors reclaiming calm. Still, reminders of the conflict are never far. Children draw pictures of temples with little flags, sometimes one, sometimes two, depending on which school they attend. Older folks carry tales of evacuation of stray shells that landed too close to the mango grove of distant thunder that wasn't thunder. The war was never total, but it was personal. You now drift past a community centre painted in cheerful colours, funded by a cross-border NGO trying to teach conflict resolution. Inside, teenagers sit in a circle, learning how to listen, how to map emotions, how to spot propaganda. One girl, maybe 15, raises her hand and asks, "Can a temple belong to two countries at the same time?" No one answers right away. A silence. Then the teacher herself, born near the border, simply says, "Maybe the temple belongs to time." And in a way she's right. The politics might label one side victorious and the other aggrieved. But the people here are building a third path, one of coexistence, awkward but sincere. They light candles at the same shrine. They share ghost stories about the same sacred fig tree. They quietly hope that the adults in suits will stop arguing long enough for the kids to grow up in peace. Now you glide again over the hills. The temple is just a silhouette in the dusk. A single dog barks below. Somewhere a kettle whistles. And in a hut, straddling the invisible line, two old men sip tea, brewed from lemongrass, and memory not bothering to ask which country they're in tonight. Now you slip further into the world of quiet diplomacy, not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind that speaks in soft voices over long tables and behind closed doors. You're floating into meeting rooms with weak tea, careful smiles, and air conditioning that hums louder than the conversation. This is ASEAN territory now, and the art of not picking sides has reached its highest form. When tensions flared between Thailand and Cambodia in the late 2000s and early 2010s, the international community looked to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the region's go-to diplomatic family, for a solution. But ASEAN isn't the stern parent type. It's more like that uncle who wants everyone to get along but avoids taking sides at the dinner table. As a bloc, it was founded on principles of non-interference and consensus. Great for trade. Tricky for temple fights. You find yourself floating into one of those ASEAN summits, perhaps Phnom Penh, perhaps Jakarta, where ministers in bright batik shirts pose for photos with awkward hand-holding gestures and then retire to discuss regional peace and stability in the most non-committal way possible. The Preah Vihear issue comes up in side conversations, always delicately, as though speaking too loudly might summon actual artillery. When Cambodia held the ASEAN chair in 2012, things got especially tense. As the host, it tried to push for a firmer stance on border tensions. Thailand naturally pushed back. The result: for the first time in ASEAN history, the group failed to issue a joint communiqué. That's like a family reunion, where no one agrees on who's hosting next year's gathering, so everyone just quietly leaves without dessert. Historians still argue whether ASEAN's silence helped keep things from escalating or merely postponed the inevitable. Some say the bloc's preference for dialogue over intervention preserved regional unity. Others argue it left Cambodia and Thailand to stew in their own quarrel unchecked. But the truth may lie in the tone ASEAN doesn't resolve so much as contain. It's the velvet box around the sharp edges of regional disagreements. And here's a peculiar little anecdote from the fringes of ASEAN law. At one summit, an Indonesian official reportedly tried to broker peace by offering to co-host a cultural festival featuring both Thai and Cambodian traditional dances at a neutral location naturally. The idea didn't take off, too much symbolism, not enough security planning. Still, the dancers were hired and ended up performing together anyway at a hotel lobby in Bali, where confused tourists applauded blissfully, unaware of the geopolitical backstory. In the meantime, other institutions tried their hand at mediation. The United Nations sent observers. UNESCO issued hopeful statements. Journalists asked complicated questions and diplomats answered with impressive vagueness. Phrases like joint development, cultural heritage, cooperation and confidence-building measures were passed around like hors d'oeuvres. No one wanted to chew too hard. Thailand and Cambodia themselves occasionally released statements of mutual respect and commitment to peace. But the subtext often read like carefully veiled grumbles. It's a bit like two roommates saying, "Of course we'll share the living room," while both quietly draw invisible lines around the couch. Still, amid the foot-dragging and flag-waving, there were slivers of sincerity. Small diplomatic teams from both sides began quietly meeting off-camera, off-record, to coordinate military withdrawals, exchange information, and prevent misunderstandings. One joint patrol allegedly ended with Thai and Cambodian soldiers sharing fried bananas and betting on who could climb a banyan tree faster. It wasn't a summit, but maybe it worked better. And it's worth noting, amid all this polite non-engagement, the temple itself continued to stand. Its walls heard less gunfire, more sweeping. More pilgrims began to return. One Cambodian monk who had fled the area during the skirmishes came back and resumed his evening chants under the same fig tree where he once played as a boy. "Peace isn't loud," he said. "It just needs time." You drift now above the region as night spreads across borders that remain, at least on paper, fixed. In reality, the land still pulses with complexity. ASEAN may not have solved the dispute, but it helped muffle the drums of escalation, and sometimes that's enough. So tonight, no battles, no rulings, just the gentle friction of diplomacy, like a stone worn smooth not by force but by 1,000 years of rain. You listen to the hush of policy papers, rustling, the clink of teacups in quiet negotiations, and the soft shuffle of monks returning to the temple they never truly left. Now your path winds quietly through a different kind of battleground, one not paved with stones or rifles, but with sentences, syllabi, and schoolroom maps. You're entering the world of education, where the next generation learns not just math or grammar, but memory. And in Thailand and Cambodia, how one learns the story of Preah Vihear depends entirely on which side of the border your classroom sits. You slip into a Thai classroom first. It's bright, orderly, with rows of uniformed students sitting cross-legged as their teacher gestures toward a wall map of Thailand. To the untrained eye, the map looks unremarkable, but wait, there's Preah Vihear labeled with Thai script, neatly placed within the country's territorial outline. No footnote, no asterisk, just included. The children copy the name into their notebooks without question. Here, the temple is taught as part of Thai heritage, an echo of ancient Siamese civilization, a structure built by a neighboring culture, but tied spiritually and geographically to Thailand. The ICJ ruling might get a passing mention, often framed as a moment of unfairness. Historians still argue whether such framing is nationalism or just pedagogical habit, but the result is clear. Young minds learn that the temple was, and somehow still is, Thai. Now glide across the border into a Cambodian school, where the air hums with chatter and the smell of steamed palm sugar. On the wall, a giant poster shows Angkor Wat Bantiai Srey, and yes, Preah Vihear, with its full Khmer name in proud lettering. Here, the narrative is more straightforward. The temple is a triumph of Khmer genius, a jewel unjustly threatened and rightfully reclaimed. The 1962 ruling is described not as an obscure court case, but as a historic victory proof of Cambodian sovereignty and international justice. In history, textbooks on both sides' maps often bear subtle differences. One edition in Thailand drew the borderline so faintly near Preah Vihear that it was barely visible. One Cambodian geography primer showed the temple with little glowing rays around it, as if to say, "Look what we saved." You chuckle, but you also realize it matters. Because long after soldiers have gone home, students remain memorizing versions of events that diverge just enough to keep wounds from healing completely. And here's a curious fringe tidbit. In the early 2010s, a Thai historian published an article suggesting that the Preah Vihear conflict could be used as a joint cultural heritage lesson, advocating for shared textbooks and binational history programs. The response mostly silence, a few polite nods, and then nothing. The appetite for joint memory, it turns out, was not on the menu. Instead, museums and heritage centers quietly doubled down on their respective versions. In Siem Reap, souvenir stalls sell glossy books celebrating Cambodia's sacred cliffs. In Bangkok, a traveling exhibition titled Lost Territories featured a model of Preah Vihear alongside other places ceded during colonial treaties. Both shows drew visitors, neither show invited the other side. But education, like water, finds its own channels. In recent years, a few grassroots projects have emerged trying to bridge the gap. Thai and Cambodian university students studying archaeology or Southeast Asian history have begun organizing exchange trips, visiting each other's temples, debating over rice dinners, and nervously comparing what they'd been taught. One Cambodian student reportedly asked her, "Thai peer, did they tell you we stole it?" The Thai girl laughed and replied, "No, they told us you never gave it back." And just like that, history melted into humor. Still, the national narratives remain firmly entrenched. School children draw national flags fluttering above the same stone tower. Each group leaves field trips with selfies, souvenirs, and subtle affirmations of their version of truth. It's soft power in the quietest form. And yet every now and then change happens. A Thai high school teacher retires early and begins teaching cross-border history online, mixing Thai Khmer and French sources. A Cambodian monk opens a temple school that encourages students to read both the ICJ ruling and local folk tales. A group of middle schoolers from both sides meet in a soccer tournament near the border. No one keeps score too seriously. The ball at least crosses the boundary freely. You drift back now past chalkboards and notebooks and rise again above the treetops. The temple is still there, patient as always. It watches over students who may never meet teachers who follow different scripts and nations that cling tightly to stories carved not just in stone, but in young minds. Because in the end, the most lasting borders are not on maps. They're drawn in classrooms, reinforced with repetition, and passed down in homework assignments. But just maybe they can also be erased one page at a time. Now the air shifts warm and dry, and you find yourself in the soft shuffle of tour groups, sun hats bobbing selfie sticks, rising like bamboo shoots, and whispers echoing off thousand-year-old stone. You're not at a war site or a courtroom, but a UNESCO World Heritage destination where ancient grandeur and modern curiosity collide. Preah Vihear is now a tourist attraction, and every footstep is a quiet referendum on identity. The tour buses pull in on both sides of the border. From the Thai side, they come up winding mountain roads with sweeping views and snack stalls. From the Cambodian side, the route is bumpier, slower, less predictable. But the temple, like a stage with only one backstage entrance, still opens more easily from Thailand's side, though international rulings say otherwise. And that's the tension. Visitors may come for culture, but they often leave with politics too. You watch as a Thai family walks up to the cliff edge pavilion. They pause beside a small sign that reads, "No entry beyond this point, Cambodian military zone." The father frowns, takes a photo anyway. The mother glances back toward the souvenir stalls, selling miniature models of the temple, some with Cambodian flags, others curiously neutral, trying to avoid offense. One Thai guide lowers her voice and explains, "We used to be able to go farther before everything." The tourists nod solemnly, even if they're not quite sure what everything means. Then, on the Cambodian side, another group arrives. French backpackers with a Lonely Planet guidebook, a Khmer tour leader in a baseball cap, and a few local teenagers selling postcards with dramatic captions like "Preah Vihear, stolen, returned, eternal." The guide points to the inscriptions on the walls and tells the group, "This temple proves our civilization's greatness." One tourist asks about the border. The guide shrugs and says, "It's not a problem today, but maybe tomorrow." Historians still debate whether tourism helps soften national tensions or simply rebrands them. On one hand, shared admiration for beauty can transcend borders. On the other, tourism becomes a tool of narrative, each plaque, each map, each explanation subtly reinforcing a claim. One 2014 report found that Cambodian tour materials framed the temple as a heroic symbol of resilience, while Thai tourist pamphlets downplayed its geopolitical context, entirely focusing instead on scenic views and architectural style. Two experiences, one temple, two. There's a quirky little tale from the mid-2010s when Cambodian and Thai border police tried to establish a joint ticketing booth for visitors to Preah Vihear. The idea was to streamline revenue and logistics. But no one could agree on who would issue the tickets or whose currency to use. The booth was built. It still stands unused like a monument to good intentions lost in translation. Meanwhile, in both countries, selfie culture surged. Thai influencers posed with the distant silhouette of Preah Vihear behind them, adding captions like, "Sacred Land, loves Thailand." Cambodian vloggers uploaded dramatic drone footage of the temple set to music with titles like "The Pride of Cambodia." Even UNESCO's own promotional video, meant to be neutral, drew subtle criticism from Thai officials for using too much Khmer terminology. Imagine that an ancient temple built without concern for hashtags now caught in the filters of 21st century soft power. And yet, amid the branding wars and tour packages, there are moments of unexpected peace. You drift over one such scene, now a quiet Thursday morning just after sunrise. A lone Cambodian monk walks barefoot along the temple, steps his orange robes catching the breeze. Not far behind, a Thai Buddhist pilgrim does the same. They exchange glances, nod. Then both stand in silent prayer beside the same weathered column. No flags, no cameras. Just two people honoring something older than borders. Down in the car park, a souvenir vendor from the Cambodian side chats with a Thai ranger who's wandered over for a break. They've known each other for years, through floods, through skirmishes, through the awkward silences of ceasefires. Today they joke about the heat, swap a bag of grilled bananas for a cold soda, and wave each other off like cousins. This is the quiet truth behind the tourist lens, beneath the noise of nationalism and narrative. People continue. They walk the same paths, admire the same carvings, sell the same keychains. The temple may be a symbol, but it is also a place, a real one, with dust, wind ants, and ice cream wrappers. And in that reality, peace isn't always formal. It just happens. One ticket at a time. One picture at a time. One long exhale under the temple's stone gaze. Now the wind stills. You rise once more above the cliffs, above the ancient rooflines of Preah Vihear, looking down not just on the temple, but on the stories piled like fallen stones around it. Here at the end of the long path, things are quiet, not because the tensions have vanished, but because they've settled into the soft hum of normalcy. An uneasy peace. Not a handshake, not quite a hug, more like a truce between tired old friends who've agreed not to bring up the past over dinner. The border between Cambodia and Thailand today is not burning. The guns are silent. The soldiers patrol, but less nervously. The flags still wave, but more softly. From satellite maps, the line appears crisp and final. But from the ground, from the temple's lonely cliff, it's a suggestion. You see it in the eyes of the villagers who've returned, in the temple guards who sit beneath Bodhi trees, trading ghost stories, in the tuk-tuk drivers who shrug when asked where exactly the boundary lies. It depends, they say, and that's the heart of it. The border is both real and imaginary. It's carved into documents, rulings and treaties, but it drifts around in people's hearts. Cambodians still see Preah Vihear as a symbol of cultural survival, a triumph of international justice, and a relic of Angkor's divine legacy. Thais still see it as something too close, too familiar to let go of completely, something that feels like theirs even if the paperwork says otherwise. Historians still argue whether these sentiments will ever fade, or whether they simply evolve with each generation. New textbooks, new tour guides, new speeches. The old stories retold with slightly different inflection. Maybe one day the temple will no longer be asked to bear the weight of national identity. Maybe. But not today. For now, Preah Vihear stands in a curious sort of stillness, both contested and calm, sacred and scarred. The stone lions at the gate are chipped but proud. The steps are uneven but enduring. The inner sanctum smells faintly of incense, dust and rain. Pilgrims climb up. School groups walk carefully in matching uniforms. UN staff snap discreet photos. And overhead, kites dance lazily in the wind, often red and blue, sometimes striped with gold, depending on which side of the market you buy them from. There's a quirky tradition that emerged in the past few years. Every February during a local temple festival, villagers from both sides meet at a spot near the cliff's edge to exchange handwritten blessings. They drop them into a carved stone basin once used for ceremonial offerings. Most messages are simple: may you have peace, may your family be healthy, may no more soldiers come. But some slip in jokes, wishes, even recipes. The basin is never emptied. It fills slowly with paper and hope, and so you float above this ancient site one last time, watching the breeze rustle the jungles below. You see monks walking single file through morning mist, saffron robes bright against the grey stone. You see tourists with sunburned cheeks pausing for selfies beside carvings of celestial dancers. You see old soldiers turned tour guides pointing out bullet marks like faded tattoos. Preah Vihear has been a kingdom's beacon, a colonizer's pawn, a courtroom exhibit, a battlefield, and a photo op. But through it all, it's remained what it always was: a sacred place built to connect heaven and earth. The borders came later, the arguments came later, the politics, the pain, the pride, all piled on top like too many coats over a simple, beautiful statue. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the final lesson the temple offers, that nothing built to honor the divine should ever become an altar to division, that the most enduring stones are the ones shaped not by force, but by faith. So now, as your breathing slows and the night folds gently around you, let's step back from the cliff. Let the temple fade behind you, its shadows growing long and quiet, its columns softened by moonlight. The drums of argument are distant now, like a thunderstorm far across the plain. What remains is stillness. Let your body sink deeper into rest like a stone nestling into ancient earth. Let the thoughts drift like incense smoke, rising through broken ceilings, through high clouds, into a sky that no map can divide. The soldiers are sleeping now, the villagers are dreaming, the temple stands watch as it has for 1,000 years, through kingdoms and countries, through war and wind, through morning bells and midnight whispers. And you're here too, gently, held in that same timeless hush. Nothing more to solve, nothing more to understand, only breath, only sleep, only stone and silence and sky.